Thank you, everyone, and thank you, the panel, for joining me. We have with me here today Sid Shah from Condé Nast, Paul Lau from Formula E, and Lucia Passarelli from Logitech. And the topic that we are covering, as mentioned, is fast and agile versus traditional research approaches. And I think this morning we heard a lot of really interesting kind of stories around metaverse and AI and kind of different new ways of trying to do research. And agile was mentioned as well, but I think what will be really useful to start with is just to understand what agile means for each one of you, because I think there are different things, there are different needs for each stakeholder, each company, there are different stages. So I think if we just start maybe with what agile means. Lucia, would you start?
I can start. So overall, I found this question really difficult at the beginning, because it's true, it's not so easy to say this is agile and this is traditional, and to really separate the different approaches. So thinking more about my experience and also the Logitech, the company I'm in general, when we think about agile, is really to get results from study in a very fast and often cheap way as well. But I think the point about being fast is really the first point. And I think you can be fast in different ways. So either because you have already your internal panel, so maybe you have already built your panel, so you can ongoing speak with this panel and to get very fast, interactions and results from the panel. But can be also because maybe there is already the technology there. We have been talking about AI a lot today in the morning that is going to help you really to get results quick. So it's not really about often the interaction, but also to get very fast data thanks, to technology. So in the first point about, overall the internal panel, that is something that we have a lot, in my company. Sometimes also means that you need to do a lot of things in-house. So means that as a team, the consumer insights team needs to be involved in a lot of things, like creating the questionnaire and, maybe talking with the consumers, analyzing the results. So this one, I'm not saying that it's always like this, but I'm saying that often is what I see as well. And often, in my mind is how I classify a little bit, how much we can classify because it's difficult.
Yeah, sure. Great, thank you.
Sure. Hi. So I come from a data and analytics background, and I also meant to do research within my organization. I head up data analytics at Condé Nast, which is a media organization. Have brands like Vogue, GQ, Wired, and so on. We have quite a few heavy digital audience, and when we talk about customers, it's both digital and offline customers. The way I see agile and research, I zoom it out in terms of what exactly are we trying to look for here. We're trying to understand the customers better here and getting the pulse of that customer. If you try and look at the differences between 1 and 2, cost, time is obviously the first thing that comes to everyone's mind. For me and for our organization, it is also about reaching the customers and getting their voice quicker and in a more iterative fashion as well, and getting a sense of creating a culture within an organization, what is good enough to give a head start to make a decision. And for me, it's that iterative approach of agile is something that we try and achieve for. Doesn't mean we go for one or the other. There are always use cases. For me, agile is getting things faster and at an iterative level and giving back to the consumers and our stakeholders what they need in terms of decision making.
Great, so I definitely agree. It's about fast. I love Lucia's considerations of, for me this means in-house. Sid speaks to me, he's talking about, this is all about continuous. These are things that you would definitely associate with agile when you're thinking about what is it and its distinction with traditional. For me, I come from a slightly different place. I'm thinking first, what is it that my client wants? So again, I agree, traditional and agile, they're not separate things. They don't sit in different boxes. Instead, they sit on a spectrum. And the reason why I mentioned, for me, I'm thinking about it from a client perspective, it's honestly just about what's good enough for my client, what's good enough for my stakeholder. And that helps me kind of determine where on that spectrum between traditional and agile am I going to sit for this question that I'm answering, this project that I'm doing. So for me, it's definitely thinking about it client first, and that almost determines what traditional or agile means.
And I think when you say what's good enough, and you're talking about being fast, you're talking about budgets, there is always that sense, is there a trade-off? What are we doing here in terms of, are we losing something by doing agile versus traditional, or, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, definitely a trade-off, and that trade-off is, money and time, as Sid has mentioned.
Yeah, I think overall in general there is, I would say not always, but often there is a trade-off. For instance, I was mentioning some of the examples with panels that we can create in-house, and most of the time these panels are not really fully representative of the external world. A lot of times, these people know very well our company, they work with us, to develop the products. So if we need to do a study where we need really to represent, the full universe, and we need to do for sure more traditional type of researches, because the panel will not be fully representative. But I think what is super important is really to understand exactly, as she said, is when specifically we need, to answer the question in a good enough approach. So leveraging, the panel, because it can be very, very fast. Or when, on the contrary, we need something, that is, more traditional and more with a representative panel, big enough, etc. And for me, another trade-off that I think sometimes I consider also when, deciding one versus the other is also, as I was mentioning before, the involvement that we need to have as a consumer insights function. And again, maybe it's not always like this, but often in my mind when I think about agile is really do it yourself. So it's really about spending a lot of time, doing things that maybe you can outsource. You can have agencies helping, and having, your team focusing on more the strategic impact that you want to have to the business partners. Again, it's not always like this, but often can be like this. So this one is also for me a trade-off that is important to consider when, deciding.
Sure, and Sid, you mentioned this kind of continuous feedback. It sounded very positive, your kind of the elements that the agile is bringing. But do you find that you had to trade off certain things going that way?
Yeah, sure. So I agree to what's already mentioned. One thing is about when I look at any type of research, I look at it from a framework point of view. Your stakeholder comes to you with a hypothesis or a question in mind, and you either validate that hypothesis by looking at any kind of data research or analytics, and you have to be at a certain level of confidence to go and respond to that, and your confidence comes in from the data that you have, the research methodology that you have used, and the confidence that you have in terms of the type of activities and the process each research area has gone into. For me, yes, there are sometimes trade-off. Quality that's always comes to the mind as one aspect, and when I say quality, it's you sometimes don't understand the underlying motives of a user or your customer when you're always focusing on a specific set of questions or focusing on an agile methodology where you're looking for more directional data to give you a head start. Yes, there is an aspect, but on the flip side, also look at what more can I get from an agile research by connecting dots to other various data sources and give that head start to more customers and consumers.
So it's kind of a hybrid and mix, yeah.
That's right.
And I think it'll be interesting to know some examples. I don't know if you guys have any examples in terms of when it goes well or maybe when it doesn't go well if we are using agile research. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to offer an example of when agile hasn't worked so well for me, which safe space, right? No one's going to tattle on me for maybe not having quite delivered taking this approach. So I mentioned that I work at Formula E. So it's a motorsport startup, but very different from a previous organisation that I worked for. So the prior organisation I worked for was a charitable organisation, and one of its responsibilities, a hat that it wore, it had a role to advise government on issues that really mattered to consumers. And you can imagine that's a lot of things. We think about the last 2 years. There are a lot of issues consumers are facing. But essentially, I was involved with and was advising on a potential new policy issue that we wanted to make a lot of noise about, something that we wanted to raise awareness of with government. So as we often find ourselves, those who can relate being in a client-side position, we're often given the question right at the cusp of a big decision being made, but you have an obligation to help your stakeholder as much as possible. How can you deliver to them the best insights you can in the time frame that you have available to you, or even the budgets that you have available? So in this particular situation, the issue that we'd kind of took notice of and that we were paying attention to, it was at the peak of the pandemic, and as a result people were staying at home and they were shopping in different ways, and your high street was changing. A lot of ATMs, so cash machines, were closing, and it was an issue that we were very observant of, that how many people are going to be affected by this issue. It's something we saw a lot of noise on social media, came through in our call centres, and we saw it in our community. So from our perspective, we can easily go to our panels, speak to our members, and can we just get a sense of how big of an issue is this? Is this something they really care about? Is this something that we need to be prioritising and spending time on as an organisation? Do we want to put money behind it? And so our panel survey, while very quick, turnaround in 24 hours, it supported this hypothesis. Unfortunately, when we went to do subsequent research, our findings were just not borne out when we spoke to a much larger representative population. And we know this is the challenge, right? How can you just help? How can you do good enough? And I guess in some ways we were lucky that we had the opportunity and it came up later in order to address and further understand the issue. But fundamentally, I guess the lesson that this taught us is that Agile is amazing, absolutely support this as an approach, but it has to be deployed in the right way. And our lesson learned was we just didn't deploy it in the right way. We may have used the right methodology, we may have answered the right questions, but did we do it at the right time? Should we have done this at the point and we were willing to spend tens of thousands of pounds on a marketing campaign, or should this have come far earlier? So I think for me, Agile is fundamental. It has to be part of my role as a researcher. But yeah, there are times that it can kind of mislead you and take you down the wrong road.
It's like we were saying in terms of certain more complex type of research like turf or conjoint, it's still, there is a benefit of doing it and having this bigger context rather than if you focus just on ATMs versus everything else, it becomes bigger.
Gosh, exactly. Yeah. So one of the subsequent pieces of research, not only speaking to a NatRep sample, it was also to understand that issue in the context of other things that were happening in people's lives. And while it's something that people are really passionate about, fundamentally it just sits far lower on their list of priorities. Exactly. And I guess with my brand researcher specialist hat on, what we also didn't understand from that member survey was actually the impact it would have had on our brand perceptions. Actually, it would have put us in a place of, oh, you are an old-fashioned brand and you only care about issues that affect older people, rather than actually, are you not the voice that's for all, and in this case, UK consumers.
And what we are hearing here a lot is that, probably there is a time and a place for one versus the other. And, do we have some kind of sense of when it's good to do agile versus when it's good to do traditional?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to the business question that I think is what we've been discussing a lot in the morning. And I think it depends exactly what do we want to learn, and also depends also on how risky is the decision that we want to take. Because sometimes, with very, very risky decision, that is very difficult then, to go back and to do something different. So I think it's important to have something that at least we believe it's solid enough to have something that is going to be really fully representative. But sometimes, we just need to quickly validate something that maybe we knew already. And so in this specific case, maybe the decision has been already taken and we just need a very quick validation. In this specific case, I think Agile, will work super well. And then as you say, there are also some specific questions, like if you need to do a conjoint analysis, if you need to do an ongoing brand health tracker, if you need to do a segmentation, maybe, I don't know, maybe traditional researchers will play a better role. But I think everything will evolve so quickly, so who knows? Maybe in a few months.
And evolves all the time as
Exactly,
well. So
exactly.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, in my organization, I had to build the data team, and I wanted to focus on two things. One is, how do I build a 360-degree view of a customer? And B, how do I implement a test and learn approach? And this is where Agile comes in, is if I start with the cultural side of things, I wanted to ensure that I get data from the research side of things on top of all the other data sources that we had on a much more quicker and a scalable format, where even I can connect data sources, what some other panelists have talked about, from web to search to other data sources. That helps you build that 360-degree view, which is great from a capability point of view, but you also want to implement and bring that change within your organization, where you have some data that you can get some a directional view of what the customer is thinking or not thinking, or what's the feedback on your product that you have launched, and gives you a head start on iterative and iteratively build on questions that you would love to know more and deep dive into. So that's where the Agile came in. We had a 360-degree view of our customer about what they were doing from our analytics tools, from our search engine questions. We had all on the dashboard that on a real-time basis gave us what customers are thinking about and what they're doing and what they're telling us. And with this Agile and some of the other research that we used, we embedded that culture within the product and marketing teams to give them a continuous voice of that customer, so that they can start moving on a very quicker basis. One of the example was the advertising study that we did. We have digital advertising, and we partner with clients, and we roll those advertising on our websites. We love to get feedback from our customer. We do traditional research and get that feedback which comes in, but we also want to make sure that we do it across the life cycle of that particular campaign and get that sense of from the customer if we do need to change the attack, or if we do need to do something different in that advertising. Should it be segmented? Should it be a different advertising based on geography? Things like that is where Agile can kick in and help us deliver more.
I think what you're saying, kind of from the digital point of view, you get very quick response. You can see if you're doing the right or the wrong, so you can adjust, and it doesn't feel like such a big damage, like what you were saying, if some big strategic decision is being made. How does it work in kind of the esports in the newer industry?
Yeah, no, I'm so impressed by what Sid has managed to do in his organisation in the last 5 years. And you're really lucky if your culture is one where you're able to work in that kind of continuous fashion. What Raquel was saying earlier about that kind of sprint approach. And, you know, if your clients and your stakeholders are going on that journey with you, one thing that's really front of mind for me, definitely in the organisation I'm working at now, but has cropped up again and again, while you as a researcher are absolutely sure of what the limitations on agile research are, and you're able to deploy it in a way that safeguards for any of those risks, we just have to keep in our mind that stakeholders don't always remember that. Like, how do you ensure that, you know, again, I also deploy a continuous ad testing and development approach at Formula E. You know, we're constantly adapting our ad campaign throughout the year, so that works really well for us. But how do you make sure that your stakeholder doesn't go off track and mistake or confuse or community forget, or, you know, maybe honestly forgets that what you've learned is about this ad specifically. You've learned that this ad delivers this message and it's the right fit for the context of the market in which you're setting this ad live, but that doesn't mean that we need to go and make that change to our product. That's not the bigger learning. And kind of keeping your stakeholders on track is really important, because that's when you can start to see Agile becoming perhaps less reliable, because suddenly its use has been stretched. And yeah, so I feel confident that we as experts understand how to best deploy, but and
I think that's a very good point in terms of what we spoke about before as well, is what is the role of stakeholder and what their expectations are in terms of, do we choose agile, do we choose traditional, and how we adjust. I think you spoke about kind of educating the stakeholder. I don't know if you want to say something.
Yeah, it's about education. It's about budget and time. So there is an element of how do you get your stakeholder on board on your journey if you're taking one approach versus the other. I think that's the key bit. They are your key consumers, so getting them on board is key. Again, there's no one versus the other. It's how do you provide the right solution to the right time that helps them deliver and move them at a relatively good speed is something that I always aim for. in one area you get the voice of a customer on a regular basis, and you can build a picture over time. In one, you get definitely more deeper insights. So what are they looking for, and how can you do that? This is something that I've done, and this is all the data cultural side of things that I invested a lot of time in my initial time at Condé Nast. Is how do you create a culture where information is used and there's an impact on terms of what the deliverables a team is providing from a data and analytics point of view and a research point of view. That impact, if you start focusing on the impact and how you align with those stakeholders, that gives you a good head start.
I don't know if anyone else has some examples or stories from the stakeholders' point of view.
I think it's not so much a story, but I think in general, the stakeholders, they come to us with, again, a business question. And I think at the end, it's really our role, to decide which one will be the right approach. And in case, we think that is agile, because actually we need to take the decision in 24 hours. And you cannot do anything else, just maybe do a very quick check, maybe even with friends, for instance, or something like this. I mean, in this specific case, it's just about coming back and say, this is what we can do, but there are these risks. So at the end, it's our decision, and for sure, and then, explaining, educating, and making them understand the risk behind the decision, and then it's something that we need to decide if we want to still to do that, or maybe we don't do, any researchers. But for sure, overall, the company also we are in can make a difference, because there are companies that are much, fast and agile, even as a company in terms of overall decision. Other companies, maybe if we just wait, many, many months, we do everything as it should be. They just wait because they can wait. And also there are some companies with more budget and more resources than others. So I think all these different things will for sure, drive the right decision. But I think what is important is really the full education and explaining, why is this, but which cons or pros this decision will take.
Sure, and any kind of side from your...
Yeah, to be honest, I'm in total agreement. I think it's ultimately us, right? We're the ones who have the responsibility, the burden to make sure we've done our due diligence and we've chosen the right approach. I think from my perspective, the stakeholders' involvement is helping you understand what's the goal that they're trying to achieve, what is the output, what is the decision that you're trying to make, and how can I help you? And then we do our best to steer them, advise them, and ultimately get them to agree to the right approach.
Yeah, it just feels what we are saying is kind of the agile offers that being cheaper and faster. So probably it's much harder to kind of, from stakeholders' point of view. And I think it was Joanna from Danone, she was saying they want cheaper, faster, but just as good. So, how to manage that. But
yeah, all the time. And hence, again, why you always get the question right at the cusp of when they need the answer. So you're definitely kind of pushed into that corner. But I think there's smart ways about it, right? That you can't change the world immediately. You can take your stakeholder on a journey. You can deliver, it might not be your first choice, an answer in an agile way, but then perhaps over time you built it out so that you are constantly building on that knowledge. Like what Sid said about a 360 view, how can you teach them, show them, prove to them that is best, that is what you want to get to, but maybe we can only answer aspects of it now, and you can show.
And I think you were mentioning kind of not being national representative, but if we are aware of that, if we are understanding we are talking to niche audiences, there is still validity obviously and certainty in the numbers, but being aware that it's got certain limitations.
If I can, because you made a good point, and there was, and there was something else. Sometimes, for very, very low incidence categories, that is very difficult really to find these people. And I can tell you that, in my business, there are some categories, some incidents that are super, super, super low. So even sometimes when you speak outside with agencies, you want to do more traditional research. So even you want to do a big qualitative, it's very difficult to find the people. So in this specific case, maybe building your own panel, having your own community, and maybe, yes, you speak always with the same people, but at the end, at least you put the consumer at the center. You're going to listen to their voice. It's not maybe traditional, it's whatever, we can say agile, we can define as we want, but it's still a panel that we can always ongoing speak. it's powerful. So again, we are going to always be clear on the limitation, but I think at least it's going to help really to bring the consumer at the center of every discussion.
Yeah, and I think also what I'm hearing is there is a lot of flexibility that Agile delivers. So, having that allows still to get more insightful final results than if you go traditional and maybe you can't change things around and things move on by the time you get to the insight point. So kind of what I'm hearing here, lots of benefits, lots of change, lots of moving, and it's quite interesting to think, what do we think traditional will be in 10 years' time? Is it going to be what it is now? We are hearing all of these new different methodologies, technologies that are almost bringing the agile into the traditional in a way. Do we think we'll get there? What's the place for traditional in 10 years?
Oh, it's that crystal ball out again. I think that's super hard. And one of the things that we were chatting about it a little bit ahead of this session. So I'm a little bit younger. When I first started out in research, I didn't get multiple months to kind of understand usage of, I think it was cleaning products, Joanna, I didn't get that. My first role was in mobile research. It was about how you use a feature phone to reach previously untapped communities in parts of Africa, right? So I've got that kind of context where Catty is already really established, depth interview, probably going to do it online. So, starting from a really different place. And then I think secondly, thinking about the current organization I work for, it's less than 10 years old. There is so much it doesn't know, and we have to stretch that budget really far. So I'm constantly trying to do as much as possible with the tiniest budget. So you would think that both of those two things would push me into a really pro-agile space. And I thought I would come out with a clear opinion on, which side of the fence do I sit on. But honestly, I still love traditional approaches. And in my heart of hearts as a researcher, I just really enjoy getting immersed when I'm taking a traditional approach. So even this week, we just launched some ethnographic in-home interviews, because how else do you understand people's perceptions of the sound of an electric motor vehicle? It's so hard to understand that without traditional methodology. So I think we'll come to rely on it less and less, but I can't see a world where we won't have traditional methodologies, personally.
Great.
I think the great answer there, but there are two other things that I would like to share is where I see it's moving. One is we already saw in terms of the digitalization and using of machine learning and AI. So the process optimization or even on the traditional research is something that's going to change in the next 5-10 years or so. We'll be more using technology to make things faster, to improve areas where we think are missing is one aspect. The other aspect is the privacy element. Some of you mentioned in one of your presentations is customers are more aware of their data and more conscious of why are you collecting, what are you collecting, why should I respond to you? We already see in some of the surveys, there was a question, how many people do surveys, but what if you throw in a 50-pound Amazon voucher? Then the survey results improve. So there's this value exchange already happening. There'll be more questions, and from a privacy point of view, what are you collecting? Why are you collecting? And as a researchers, I would like you think about what if you don't have that data for a longer period of time? What if a customer comes back and say, I would like to take my data from your database. Please delete my data. What happens to your research analysis then is something that we all should be starting thinking about, and and again, the machine learning and AI can help to fill that gap. But we need to be thinking about that our data may not be robust. There will be more technology in play in the future, and we have to continuously adapt to these situations to help and deliver our insights to the stakeholders.
Great. Lucia, last words.
Yeah. No, I think I agree on everything that Siddharth said. I think for me in the future both will exist, but it's also true that digitalization, AI, technology in general will drive a faster researches in general. So everything will be very, very fast. So I think it will be even more difficult, to separate the two different approaches. But still, I believe that both approaches will exist.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to the panel for talking about this subject. And if you have any questions, please do let us know.